So next up, for our final talk of the day, is Jean-Baptiste Hervé. He's a former game engine developer at Kiloton and Crytek and Spider. And now he's a PhD student that focuses on procedural generation. He's also part of the organizing team for the generative design in Minecraft competition and for Prog Jam, which is a jam about making things that make things. And in today's presentation, he's going to talk about the science of creating. Jean-Baptiste, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Whoa. OK, I'm going to do as good as the previous presenter. So, nope. OK, about myself, despite the great introduction that you made. So yeah, I'm a former engine programmer in the video game industry, but I like to think too much about things people don't care about, so I'm doing a PhD. And yeah, my motive in the industry or as a researcher is to empower artists. So briefly, I want to use my time here to do a bit of self-promotion about one of my competition, which is the generative design in Minecraft competition. So it's a yearly competition about like procedural content generation. And as you can see on the 4 screenshots here, all of these villages or settlements have been created by an algorithm that have been submitted by various teams from all around the world. And so if you are already interested in procedural content generation, or if this talk creates some sort of interest, and you want to have a first chill and nice project to get started with, feel free to join. You just have to type GDMC or the full name of the competition into Google, and you should find us. OK, a bit of forward about this full talk and what it is about. So I had this, if I could do a very daunting talk about PCG. I would say PCG for the rest of the presentation. PCG and math equation and snipe set of code and so on. But I figured out those already exist on YouTube and various places on the internet. And so what I wanted to do today is to bring you a bit of the world of research in video game into the engine. So Enjmin, sorry. Because there are people not very familiar with creating video game, but that are very invested in improving the science of making it. And there is, in terms of procedural content, there is a lot of good stuff to bring you today. And so what I call the state of the art, which is what this talk is about, is state of the art is in science basically what the science is saying at this exact point in time about a specific subject. So I can't talk in 1 hour about everything there is to say about PCG, but I will try to bring you what is relevant for both programmer, designers, producer, and so on. By the way, who is not a programmer in the class right now? Oh, OK. Thank you for showing up. I promise I won't make it too technical. By the way, I don't want you to feel like you have to wait until the end to ask questions, especially if you are not you don't understand what I'm talking about at some point. So feel free to interrupt me, and I can repeat the answer if the micro is in the opposite part of the room. It's fine. Yeah, and final things I would like to say is I'm well aware that being in the position of an AI researcher in generative content in 2023 is a more complicated situation that it used to be. I know people have a lot of suspicion and doubt about the future and what AI is about to do to various art fields, which are legitimate concern. And I'm not gonna give my honest opinion or bring definitive answers to doubts you may have today, just to be clear. But I hope that by the end of the presentation, maybe you will grasp a few points that might help you to try to guess what the future is about. Yeah, just to be clear, for the rest of the presentation, I will use like very specific terms, so like PCG instead of saying every time procedural content generation. The other ones I may use is pseudo-random. Honestly, it's just like to be very specific, but it's just like it's randomness that we are controlling, right? Because like you don't want to have total randomness in what you're creating. A program or a software that is responsible to create content is what we refer to as generator. So I will use that term from now on. And a single object created by your generator is called an artifact. So I will also use the term artifact, if you don't mind, for the rest of the presentation. But before getting really into the subject, maybe we are not all agreeing about what procedural content is. So, because I observe, especially online, people are like strongly different opinion about it, especially like non-expert, and like people tend to criticize also things and say that are not PCG. And the reason why there is Isaac in the middle of this slide is I once showed up onto a live stream on Twitch, and the streamer was explaining like binding of Isaac, is not procedurally generated its levels and its maps, because it's just like handmade maps that are combined together, and therefore they are not procedural. And that was a bit annoying to me, a bit frustrating, because I would like to explain to you why this is a strong a statement I'm disagreeing with. And by doing so, I will introduce what is PCG. So you might be familiar with this graph. This beauty is a game engine, right? There is like all the software component of it. There is like the AI, the various SDK, the saving system, and so on. That's just an engine, right? That's not a video game. In order to create a video game, you have to give it like a few assets, like sprites and beautifully done scripts, and your engine will read this and turn it into a game. So one could say, actually, your game is made of two things, two separated worlds. One is the logic, and one is the data. And so maybe we could consider that PCG is like whenever the logic is responsible for creating the data, such as in Minecraft, where the logic, the engine, is creating the world, the actual content of the game. And we could create a weird opposition saying, yeah, a game such as Last of Us 2 is heavily relying on homemade content, animation, assets, narrative, scripting, and so on. And therefore, it's not procedural at all. And so one could say, okay, on the left side, we have the procedurally based game. And on the right side, on the blue side, we have like the non-procedural game, the ones that are actually created by human. And so what happened to a game such as Binding of Isaac? Do we put it into the middle? Because like it's partially created in runtime, but also the way levels are created is prior to the game runtime. So how do we do? Where do we put it? Well, I will argue that you have to be a bit less binary based and advocate for a PCG spectrum, right? Where things belong in some place in the spectrum where they are slightly procedurally generated. And by doing so, we can include a wide variety of games into that spectrum. Like Diablo 3, so there's plenty. Which game are you approving for? Yeah, it's good choice. But yeah, Diablo 3, it's heavily relying on PCG for loot, but the rest of the game, it's mainly like handcrafted. Valheim, the game is basically, the goal of the game is the same whenever you're launching a new game, right? But the map is completely different. Wildland, a great example of a game that is like completely straightforward and uncrafted and very decisive. But in the process of creating the game, they heavily relied on using like automated tools because the map was so big. So the map is generated, the villages are generated, various locations are generated, the roads, the rivers, the train tracks, a lot of things are generated. But from the outside, not a procedurally generated game. Let's play a little game, a little thought game. Let's step back from the games, the video games, I mean, and let's look at other way to create in the surrounding world, like assuming that we are using both, human creation and systems to create stuff around us. Maybe the spirograph could be seen as a procedural system, right? You have a human input, you put your favorite color into one of the circles, you go around, and like the mechanism is drawing for yourself. And if you think about it, it's in a way procedural. And the same goes for tarot and divination in general. Like you have a system which is like your deck and the way you are drawing cards, and then your human spirit is in charge of like creating a narrative, and this narrative is the future of the person in front of you. And so that's basically procedural storytelling. And I have an even spicier take. If you think about it, like Balbros is basically giving you like techniques that are very easily reproducible and very like, how do I put that? Yeah, that's the problem with spicy steaks. You can't remember them totally. But yeah, the idea is like you have a very systemic approach to how to paint things, but things that are coming from your mind as a human. So next time you have to argue about is something procedurally generated or not, try not to think about is this really the case, but more like, is this something relevant in the current context? Does it matter about the game we are talking about? Okay, with that being said, we know that everyone know what I'm calling PCG or not. Let's dive into the subject. So PCG, procedural content generation. So the rest of the talk, I will like go in order through one of each layer, and like have a bit of a reflection about it. Like the P for procedural, like I will talk about the various techniques that we can use to create content. The C is how we use this content, how do we value this content, and it's more about like design in general. And the G is like more like food for thought. Okay, let's talk about the actual procedure in PCG. So that's where it gets very technical, and if you're a designer, you're allowed to sleep. So we usually like try to recoup those things into 3 classes of algorithm. I will try to not spend too much time onto it because it might be a bit daunting, but like just give me a bit of a chance about it. So the first approach you may have when building a generator is like having a construction-based approach, where basically construction-based stands for like basically scripting. Let's write in code a cooking recipe for content. So you can have like a basic random distribution or random parameterization of existing assets, such as like level generation in Binding of Isaac, right? Your artist, your game designer, they are in charge of creating part of the level, and then you have a very simple algorithm that is in charge to randomly dispatch them all together. And it's not because it's simple that it's not doing the trick, right? Like you have different ways to deal with randomness. And so Sorry, I'm a bit sleepy and it's hard to breathe. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you can, even with those very simple approach, you can think about how you want to create randomness. Like, for instance, this is like complete randomness. This is a Gaussian randomness. This is a Pareto randomness. And those are like design and artistic choice you have to think about while building such a generator. Then you can rely on pure math. This is where things tends to be a bit boring, but like you can use tools such as Voronoi diagram or FBMs that are creating curves that are shaped like mountains range, or even Perlin nodes that are well known in ethics, for instance. So those things might seem like very abstract, far from aesthetic, and not very interesting. But in the end, you can produce very nice creations, such as this map generator around here that is basically starting from a Voronoi diagram and turning it into a city. And the last one, the most popular one among the dev and the guys that really enjoy like math and so on, is like simulation-based, such as in Dwarf Fortress. So this idea to have like a very complicated program inspired by real-life events that is running inside your virtual world and creating realistic content. Namely, you can say like water eroding a mountain that create a specific height map, or plant generation, biome generation, and so on. So those are usually a lot of fun for programmers, but they tend to leave artists a bit on the side. Agent-based, I'm not going to spend too much time about it, but it's basically like simulating simulating a tiny AI that is creating the content by itself. Like, for instance, in dungeon generation, you can have this agent walking about like a non-existing dungeon, and as they progress into the dungeon, they also create it. All right, search-based. So the idea behind search-based is having something that is like less definitive and predictable as your constructive approach, but to put like some responsibility in charge of your generator. So actually, the idea is, I'm not going to dive too much about this, but is to say, okay, generator, whenever I ask for a piece of content, just give me one that is satisfying my criteria. You don't have to give me the first one you choose. You don't have to give me the best one possible. You have to give me the one that that match my requirement at a given time. So, for instance, constraint solver are constraint solver are basically the ones that you say, okay, you have to match this set of constraints. Like you have to create, I don't know, something that is not smaller than this size, but not bigger than this size, and so on. The two other ones are a bit too complex, and I think they are not relevant for today, but feel free to ask me about it at some point. Because yeah, as I already spoiled it, the next one is a big one. It's a machine learning based approach, and maybe I assume a lot of you have been discussing this lately. Out of curiosity, raise your hand if you have ever used ChatGPT. A lot. Even for like game design or stuff that are related to homework. Yeah. Okay, great. And who else has ever used like systems such as like Stable Diffusion, DALI, Midjourney? Yeah, quite a few. All right. So those are possibilities, but they are not the only existing system. Some of you might have heard of like wave function collapse, which is basically, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is basically this simple system of like turning an existing image or system into patches. And yes, sorry. No, it is machine learning based. So that's, yeah, let me explain. So as you can see on this graph here, so basically you are giving this image as an input to wave function collapse. And what the wave function collapse will be doing is cutting this image down, breaking it down into small squares, and learning the relationship from one square to another. Like you have to be on the right side of this square, you have to be below that square, and so on. And so just by using that very little patch of that very little textures, it is able to recreate all of these different images around here. That makes it like very efficient because it requires very little data. So I get your confusion that nowadays whenever we're talking about machine learning, we all imagine like giant cluster owned by a company in the Silicon Valley is like scrapping billions and billions of images. But actually very simple systems like this one can be turned into machine learning. Let me just finish this one. However, you are not obligated to use wave function collapse in that specific way. And a lot of people, I do agree, used it as a search-based approach. Does that answer your question? Okay. But at the very core of it, at the very beginning, the first application was sought for machine learning. And yeah, finally, the last one, deep learning. So having like a giant set of data that is scrapped by a giant algorithm, a giant neural network, and we try to turn like relation in the content into like some sort of mathematically rules, a set of mathematical rules. Those are very difficult to do in video games because it's really complicated to actually create a large data set in video games. But yeah, so this week we had already 2 papers released that are based onto ChatGPT and try to apply it to level design. So maybe a couple of you in the room are like, oh shit, they are coming for us too. But to be fair, if you look at how this is working, nope, sorry, yeah, like this is not how you design a level, right? Or it's not like an accurate depiction of the level you might have in your head. So the road is still long for you, my friend. Don't worry. But yeah, there are efforts that are put into this way. Okay, if we continue to move on, you might assume, okay, so one can assume that machine learning is necessarily better than search, which is necessarily better than construction-based. And to that, I respond, it's absolutely not the case. Yes, machine learning is extremely powerful at the moment. Like, for instance, try to do the same thing as what Stable Diffusion is doing currently, but through scripting, like all the different possible combinations through like a script. Good luck with that. Like scripting how to draw, I don't know, a horse, hands, and so on. And if you, but in the opposite way, so I talked about my Minecraft competition a couple of slides earlier. All the attempts to use machine learning in this competition failed dramatically. Like none of them are able to create something that is at a slightly convincing. But in the opposite way, simulation-based approach are performing very well because they adapt very well to the environment. They do something that is very close to what the people had in mind. So that has to be taken into account when you decide which approach is interesting for your generator. I love these screenshots. What a beauty. So for those of you that might not recognize it or be knowledgeable about it, this is PoE, Path of Exile. And so this is basically loot everywhere on the screen. And like a fair share of it is being generated. And the first question about like the content that we are designing and generating is, okay, what type of content can we generate? And my answers to that is all of it. At this point in research, people have been attempting to recreate any part of a video game. Can be texture, meshes, music, but also set of game rules, AI behavior, even entire games. All of these are not great, let's face it, but there is potential approach to be used for any kind of content, which is exciting in a way, right? You can do whatever you want. The question is not about like what type of content you are trying to generate, but more like what's the quality of the content you want to achieve. So for instance, like very design related stuff are very easily to recreate, right? Because like for instance, if we look at this weapon in Borderlands, the stats are being generated, right? All the statistics. And those are very virtual related and very abstract based content. So it's quite easy to generate and turn into a game asset. What is, in the opposite, quite challenging to do in a qualitative way is like things that we associate with a certain aesthetic, right? Like meshes, textures, music. This has to be pleasing to a human being, and it's very difficult to capture what is the criteria of a good or bad asset. I mean, when I say it's difficult to determine what is a good asset or not, we as humans are doing it every day in our daily life, right? But to explain to a machine what constitutes a good asset or not is quite challenging. But this is not the only issue you will facing when doing PCG. The first one is what we call the kaleidoscope effect. So I assume everyone here has once in their life played with a kaleidoscope, which basically is fun for like 10, 20 seconds, because then you start to understand what is the system and how it works. Like in the first 10 seconds, you're like, oh, it's amazing, it looks beautiful, it changes whenever I'm moving. But then you realize, oh, okay, it's just like 3 mirrors with a few pearls inside, and it gets like less surprising and interesting. The same goes with PCG, right? Once your player has figured out the limits of your generator, what it can achieve and what it can't achieve, once they figure out the pattern between the artifacts that are being produced, well, it's less surprising, therefore less entertaining, and depending on what type of content you're generating, like the generator might lose interest to your player. Another challenge you will have to face is what we refer in the field as the 1,000 bowl of oatmeal problem. So let me put it. Imagine you have created the best possible bowl of oatmeal generator. Like it simulated every single grain, the way the milk is falling onto it, the different garniture and so on. Like it's the peak of both engineering and design and artistic creation, right? Like magnificent oatmeal. But it's still a terrible generator, and I will explain you why. The problem is, to someone that is interacting with your oatmeal generator, if you show them like 1,000 of generators, they won't be interested into it. And the reason is because a bowl of oatmeal and one that is mathematically different based on your generators like in human perspective, they look the same as just bowl of oatmeal. And this is where we start to touch like a very complicated issue. I mean, two of them, in fact. The first one is you have to create what we call perceptual differentiation. So it's the idea that once can your generator create two artifacts and a human being can, just by looking at them, say, okay, these two are different. And it might sound a bit obvious like that, but this is quite difficult to achieve, right? And even more difficult, we don't have like an automated way to say, okay, these two are being different. And even more, sorry, too much too soon. Even more complicated is once you have reached the stage where your generator is creating like pieces that are perceptually for human different, then there is a stage above where you are able to produce like unique content, and what in research we are referring to as perceptual uniqueness. And how do you define uniqueness? How you can say, okay, this asset is strictly unique, it has its own character. And how can you in code say, okay, this is how you create a unique piece of content? These two issues, I mean, these two challenges are, depending on the type of content you're doing, very difficult to approach. And I'm today, in exclusivity, I will give you a couple of advice about how to face them. So one could say, okay, let's build the most robust, the most complex, and the most tech-advanced generator that can handle those issues and work at creating unique bowl of oatmeal and stuff like that. And to me, the answer is mostly, maybe this is more a design issue and not a tech issue. So first of all, let's think about, should you use online or offline PCG? By that, I mean, do you have to use like PCG that happen in game time or in production time? Because when you're in production time, you can generate a large range of assets and handpick the ones that are relevant, the ones that do have characters, the ones that you want to keep and put into your game. And it's not a bad thing, actually. It's a very straightforward way to fix the issue, and you can obtain a result that is significant for the game you're trying to build. While in the opposite way, whenever you're building something that is happening on game time, because your game does need it, this gets a bit more trickier. The other design solutions that I really like is what we call the fruitful, the fruitful void. Instead of explaining it, I will give you an example. Let's say we're working on a character generator. So we have this very complex program that is creating background for characters with a backstory, the items they are wearing, the relationships they have with various characters, and so on. And the more and more details you add to this character generator, the more complex it becomes to tie everything together, to keep things coherent, to keep things interesting. And maybe the solution is not to create a more complex generator, but actually to create a simpler one. The idea of fruitful void is to say, okay, instead of having these very complex character generators that give like a very detailed background to each NPC in our game, let's just give them like a handful of characteristics, like maybe they are small, redhead, and I don't know, they don't like beetroots or something like that. And this is the most random example that I came up with in my head, but you have to, what you will observe is that your players by themselves will investigate, their mind will investigate the void that is led by a generator between those different characteristics. And they will make by themselves your generator more powerful because they will by themselves finish the work of your generator, if I may say. I'm not sure if I've been clear enough on this one. But the idea is basically less is more. Okay, so we have fixed our design issue. We have fixed like our tech issue. Our generator is great. And let's say that we have reached the pinnacle of PCG. Like every single thing that we are able to create is truly unique, and we can create a large amount of them. That's also an issue. So in the field, we have like two different approaches to call that issue. One is infinite Rembrandt. So let's imagine a machine that every time you press a button, you get a new Rembrandt painting. And the other one that is actually maybe more relevant is the Bach faucet. So what is the Bach faucet? Actually, we can already generate new Bach music. We have been able to do it like for decades now. Like there is a generator that is able to create music that is in the same style as Bach. And a couple of like Bach specialists sat there, listened to the music and said, okay, this is actually the same music that what Bach was composing. So you could start from now listening endlessly to new Bach tunes until the end of your life. But this is not interesting, because what is great about Bach music is you have relation to it. You have listened to it in a certain context, and Bach himself wrote this into a specific context and put part of his soul into each of these compositions. Like, and the same is going on right now with AI and ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion. Is suddenly we are all able, with a click of the mouse, to create high quality content that we can consume straight away without any effort. But do we really care about this content that we are able to create that easily? I think one of the best quotes that I saw about ChatGPT is someone saying, yeah, your ChatGPT prompts, they are exactly like your dreams. Everyone wants to talk about them, but no one is really interested into this. And that is another challenge, actually. You don't have to create like something that is very that is perfect in every way. You have to create something that is interesting, that is moving, that is telling something to your player. Oops, sorry about that. Whoa, this one is very blurry. Okay, so maybe one way to address that is the use of the content. And what a lot of video games are doing, actually, currently in 2023, they are using PCG, but they are using it as a filler, as for the background content, such as GTA for the NPC and the crowd and everything. These are like artifacts, you are not very paying attention to it, and it costs near to nothing to generate them, and it's a great way to address this. So yeah, that could be one way to do it. Like you can use PCG only for non-relevant things that are in the background. But some other games are doing the opposite. Like whenever you're launching a new game of Animal Crossing, the game will generate for you a brand new island or town, depending on the version of the game. And this generation system is actually very, very simple, right? It's not like that complicated. And if you look at a series of like, I don't know, 10, 100 different islands, they will look like quite the same. But because each of these artifacts are linked to a player, are linked to a game that are spending thousands of hours, tens, hundreds, thousands of hours onto it, the relationship they are tying with this very small portion of artifact, this small block of generated terrain, is not the same as an NPC in GTA. And this is a way to make your content actually quite sorry, relevant. Not by making it like something that you consume easily, but something you player have to care about. Okay, on to the last part, the generation. So first of all, how do we generate content? I mean, the proper phrasing of what I want to express here is, how do we build a generator? How as a team, how as a bunch of young and motivated Eng-Min graduated, we sit around the table and we say, okay, let's use PCG. So first of all, one thing we all have to take into account is we will not save time at all. Like you might say, okay, let's use PCG because like in a click of a button, we can generate like hundreds and hundreds of assets and we don't have to care about it. But designing and building your generator will take a crazy amount of time. And the time you're saving by not actually hand creating the assets is time where you will be fixing bugs, fixing design issue. So don't fool yourself with this one. And we are not firing all our artists or designers either. Because first of all, PCG is a team effort, right? I know that us dev, we have this fantasy of, oh, I can do better than all of them, faster, better, stronger, just by typing code, right? But no, this is a team effort. If you are working hands with hand with the designer, with your artist, in order to build a more robust and interesting generator, your generator will be better. A good example is No Man's Sky. Because I'm a nerd, I've watched all the GDC talk about No Man's Sky, and one thing is certain, like every single member of the 10 people that worked on that game were deeply implicated in all the planet generation was working. It can be the creative director, any single artist, the guys that was in charge of doing the sound design. When your game is really relying that heavily onto PCG, you have to get the whole team on board. And this one is mostly for the devs. Beware of feature creep. Because like once you get on that path of having a generator that is able to create like content, it's very inspiring and very motivating, and you're like, oh my God, we can create like thousands of worlds in less than a minute, and they are very detailed. Let's add this new cool feature to the generator, and this one, and this other one. And as sooner than you will realize it, you are fully buried into the feature creep thing. So careful with that. I know that especially again, us dev, we want to like keep adding these new cool features that will make the generator 10 times better. And in the end, we will not. It's hard to breathe. But let's ask even like simpler and more direct question. Why are we even generating content in the first place? Maybe it's a core element of a game. Maybe we are doing a roguelike or a sim-like, and we want things to be quickly repeatable. And if that's the case, maybe most of the things that I described earlier are not relevant because you don't care if people are aware that this is content that you're consuming, and you just want to replay one more level that is slightly different than the previous one. So maybe it's a core concept of your game to just rely on PCG. Maybe it's also your scope. Maybe what you're trying to achieve can't be achieved by any team of any size. Maybe you are doing like something like Minecraft or Wildland or No Man's Skies. And that's one reason to use PCG. Like maybe you are a small indie studio with like 10 devs, but if you were to be like 5,000 people in your team, maybe that's not something you can achieve anyway. Speaking of that, usually, especially in video games, when we refer to PCG and the scale it's bringing to your creation, most of the time we are like, okay, we can make things bigger, larger, wider, like make the biggest map ever created in a video game. But you can also think about depth too. Like with PCG happening online, in game time, you could imagine being able to speak to any NPC and give in real time to that NPC friends, family, beliefs, characteristics that are mattering to your video games. And for every single aspect of the lives of this NPC, you can keep digging into it, and your generator will create more and more new features to explore. So that is one aspect you can go into. And one last reason you might want to use PCG, and is one that is less discussed, but actually I really enjoyed that Olivier de Rivière brings that up earlier today, is maybe we want to do, no, you can read it. Maybe we just want to do interactive content. Maybe we want our generator to adapt the difficulty of the game based on the skill of the player without having to predict it. But let's think further. I really like the example he gave in his talk. Let's say we have a player giving a small range of notes, and the game turns out into an hymn that is playing whenever the crew of people in EVE Online are doing anything in the game. Like they are creating the main theme of the game and their adventure. Also, Townscaper is doing that, right? He's letting you create this tiny, cute, and colorful tone without requiring you to, to have prior knowledge and know how to do that, because you have the generator to assist you. And let's imagine like games where whenever your player is crafting an object, like the generator is generating like an artifact that goes hand in hand with the crafting process or the player's playthrough throughout the game so far. Oh, one last reason to use PCG. This one is a bit like more avant-garde and conceptual, but so for those of you that are not familiar with this pretty face, this is the first ever generated painting. I think it was sold in an auction house in 2015, something like that. And there's a few researchers right now that are like, yeah, we are mostly using generative systems and AI as a tool, but maybe we can like completely unhitch them and let them create whatever they want, because maybe at the end of it, we will obtain like results that we have never seen before in any piece of media. So let them run wild. I'm pretty sure that's not something you want to aim for in a commercial video game, but rest assured, like some people are thinking about it. Okay, the last thing that I would like to point out is whenever you're building your generator with your team, you are creating this wide range of possibilities, this tiny infinity of content that might be consumed in various ways by your players, that might have various quality, various like memories that will be attached to it. But it's not because like it generated, it doesn't have a meaning. And I think, especially in the industry side of things, when we think about BCG, we focus quite a lot on what is being produced, but we tend to forget that the generator itself is what we are creating. As one of my colleagues put once, is you are not creating like thousands of assets. No, what you're really creating when you're building a generator is a style that will be transferred to every single item this generator will be building. That was the first goal of No Man's Sky. The idea was to transpose the styles of old sci-fi novel and let you get into them, just as the creator were when they were child, but on a computer screen, not just on your mind. And I think that's it's a great way to put it. Like, whenever you're building this, a system like this, keep in mind, you're not like building Minecraft maps, or you're not building Borderlands games. No, you're creating a style that will transfer to every single asset. And I talk about No Man's Sky quite a few times already, but I think there is something beautiful about this game is, even if people shamed on it quite a lot on its release, is this game is not afraid of being generated. Like, as I said earlier, most of the time in the industry, we tend to put like generated content in the background as a filler thing that we don't care about. And No Man's Sky, the idea is that the generator is at the center of the game. The whole idea of the game is to explore this infinity, what this generator is able to do. Even like in the game mechanics and in the game narrative, like you are facing robots that are called sentinels. And whenever you are degrading whatever the generator has created, they are attacking you. The NPC in the game are referring to like the order or stuff that the origin of the universe. But it's actually just a meta text to talk about the real origin of the world, which is the generator. And I think that one of the things that I love the most about No Man's Sky is that the generator is the main character of the game. So yeah, keep in mind that once you will join me in the wonderful world of PCG, the generator that you will be building is a piece of art, and even if it's just integrated in a larger piece of art, which is called your game. Yeah, this one is one too. It's a collaborative effort created by artist, designer, and programmer. Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you all for your attention. If you want to go further down into and more practical or focused recommendation, first of all, I will advise you to watch the So You Wanted to Build a Generator talk by Kat Compton. It's a great talk, and it dives down into what is the process for you and your team to build a generator. And also, if you are more on the programming side of things, working with change from Ines McKendrick, which is one of the lead programmers on No Man's Sky. It's never finishing. This one is a great talk. In terms of jams and other events, so the GDMCs that I already mentioned, the Prog Jam, which is a jam about like making things and make things, 7-day roguelikes, November for artists. I mean, there is plenty of those. In terms of books, PCG in game design, PCG in narrative design, the PCG books, and more recently, the PCG ML book. All of these are great, and if you want to dive into any of those things, of those topics, I strongly recommend them. By the way, I do have with me today PCG in game design, PCG in narrative, and PCG book, if you want to go through it and see if that's something you're interested in. In terms of game, I strongly recommend you to play and read about and watch talk about No Man's Sky, Minecraft, Spelunky, and Unexplored 2s, which are like two great games in terms of level generation. And in terms of narrative, I invite you all to play any of the Kid Fox games. I mean, they are all of various quality of an interest, but they are all focusing like, you know, creating narrative through the lens of procedural content generation. Yeah, you can also follow researcher, generative artists, and yeah, if you are really, really motivated, here is a list of some of the interesting paper you might go through. Okay, if you don't have time or don't want to ask questions right now, you can find me on these. Also, if you are working on a project or planning to create a video game that is involving PCG, I'm happy to help. If you are looking for a PCG expert as a consultant, I'm also available, and now is the time for questions.
So I think we have the time for a few questions. So if you have.
Hello, thank you for this talk. It was very interesting, and I will add that I really loved the part where you talk about procedural generation as something that is artistic, because it is. And to give an example, No Man's Sky, it's the first game that really gave me that sense of infinity when, for the first time, you get out of a planet and then you see the planet that you were before. And then you realize the scale of the things. And it's the same thing for Minecraft also that you use as an example, because yes, the procedural generation is good, but actually it's the gameplay that creates an amazing context, and that's what procedural generation is about, I think. So my question is that you talk about a lot of stuff, art, coding and stuff, but maybe I didn't follow all of it, but I yet have to hear about narration. In a procedurally generated context. And I know that some games do it. I think there was a game called Road 96 that tried to experiment a bit with that. Could you talk about maybe a way to implement some form of procedural generation in narrative design or narration, and how the caveats to avoid when doing so, if you can?
I mean, so you are asking me a very complex question about a field that is very big and heavily invested. So the problem with narrative generation is, as I said earlier, narrative is a very high-level things, right? A very human things, and the more rooted into reality and close to human you get, the more easier it is to fail, right? So one possibility that I gave is to actually not try to be super precise in the story that you're telling, but to let like blanks that the player can invest and try to by themselves tie the knot create a connection different part of the story. That could be one approach. Or you have to be extremely robust. I mean, it really depends to what you're aiming for, and I mean, it really depends on your game too, right? If you want it to be replayable, if you want to have a large scope of narrative and so on. I could give you like a couple of suggestions of game you can look into. Also, like what researchers. I mean, there is like a lot of researchers that are heavily focused on that specific topic. I don't have time to read everything that is produced in that sense, but I can give you a recommendation if that's something you're interested in too. I think there was another one in the very... No, okay, sorry, go on.
Sorry. So thank you for the presentation. For me, I was more asking about not about the creative uniqueness, content, etc., but more about how to create tools that assist the game designer, artist, etc. And the first thing we thought and we think is that is very complex in a generator, whoever it is, it's about parameters. And also as of defining a characteristic. I know it's kind of can be with a wave collapse approach, search-based approach. We define the rules and the content that will define these parameters. But for kind of more deep learning approaches, is there resources to about researches about how to make a kind of small set of features or kind of parameters that is relevant for human and not for a machine, because I don't care about kind of like how do we say that? But gram features, mathematical things that define the features about an image. I care about the colors or something like that.
Yeah. So basically, you want a way to abstract like parameters that can then be like to a human level and then break down into like mathematical parameters that can be handled by your generator.
Yes.
Okay. I assume you're a coder.
Yes, with some kind of background also with master in 3D and sound.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yes.
So first of all, you have to keep in mind that your artists, they are like very, I mean, they are well educated on their field, and they have that like, especially like technical artists, let's say, they are very good at math, a bit into programming and so on. So you have to exchange with them. I think, especially in tools, you have to communicate and understand very carefully what are the needs of your artists, right? Communication is the key here. And then I agree that sometimes you will have these key parameters that is very code oriented and very mathematical, and you can't like easily turn into abstraction. So you have to ask yourself, first of all, does my designer needs to know about it? Is it a relevant parameter? Then maybe there is a way to break that down into something that is an artist can understand, right? And it can be through documentation, it can be through talking with them, explaining how the generator is working and what this specific parameter is doing, right? And how that's relevant for what they are producing. And last of all, yeah, and sorry, and after this conversation, maybe you will end up with like, yeah, with the terms for a name for the parameters that is like helpful for everyone. Another option is maybe, and this is where UX designer and UI designer join in the party, is maybe your parameter has to be addressed in different way. Maybe you don't have to enter a value. Maybe you want to use a drop-down menu. Maybe you want to have like a sub generator that is dedicated to a specific type of content that is like tweaking the value of your very complex parameter. I mean, there is plenty of way to address it, and you don't necessarily have to deep dive into a very, very complex approach that is turning like high level natural language value into something that your program is able to understand. Does that answer your question?
Yes, kind of. I was thinking more about name, about specifically system to address the system, like GAN could be one, but it's kind of not very reliable depending on the data we use in machine learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, this discussion, I think it was very important, so I agree with that. But yes, since it's research, I was just asking if there is some researches and...
I mean, definitely there are some, right? I mean, yes. Yeah, it was written somewhere in the big book of everything. I mean, when you look at this this ugly thing, right? It's basically turning text into level, and the more progress you will make, the more fine-tuning we will do, and the more precise it will get, right? But is it something that is really necessary for your level designer? Is it very helpful? Is text the thing that you are the best interface possible for your designers? I mean, you're talking about in the context of the production of the game, right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is where I'm telling you that again. This is also a conversation you need to have with your UI guy and UX guys. These are things you need to, conversation you need to have as a team, and not just the programmer and the artist on the other side. And I wish I could like give you a title of papers that address this exact issue. I don't have one from the top of my head, I'm sorry. But maybe like take a moment to think about like, is this really something that matter in game production, or like maybe there is like other workarounds that are more relevant.
I think it's time. Thank you, JB, for your presentation.
Welcome.
And we have a final announcement.
So effectively, thank you everyone. So it's the beginning of the party, yeah. It's actually an after work. There will be food and there will be a bar. You can pay by card or by money. Just a quick word about entrance. So please be attentive, because I will not. I will just state. So until after 8 p.m., all entrants will need a wristband from the EGC. And after 10 p.m., there will be no entrances anymore, even if you have the wristband. And the party stop at midnight, so we will ask you to leave at midnight. And after 10 p.m., all leaving will be definitive. I think it was clear. Sorry, it's the end of the day. Thank you all. See.